The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elementary school parking lot as Marcus Chen adjusted his security guard uniform and checked his watch. 3:15. Emma would be walking through those doors any moment now, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, her face lighting up the moment she spotted him waiting by the old Honda Civic that had seen better days but still ran faithfully. Marcus straightened his shoulders and smoothed down the navy blue shirt that bore the mall security badge. It wasn't the career he'd imagined for himself 8 years ago, but it was honest work that paid the bills and kept food on the table. More importantly, it gave him the flexibility to be here every day when Emma needed him most. The school bell rang, and within seconds, children poured through the double doors like water through a dam. Marcus smiled as he watched the familiar chaos of pickup time, parents calling out names, teachers directing traffic, and kids racing toward waiting cars and buses. His eyes scanned the crowd until he found her. Emma Chen emerged from the building with her usual careful steps, her dark hair pulled back in the ponytail he'd managed to create that morning after watching 3 YouTube tutorials. She clutched her purple backpack with both hands and looked around until their eyes met. The smile that spread across her 80-year-old face made every difficult moment of the past 2 years worth it. She jogged toward him, her sneakers slapping against the pavement, and Marcus opened his arms to catch her in the hug that had become their daily ritual. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist and squeezed tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the faint smell of the coffee he'd spilled on his uniform that morning. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, ruffling her hair as they walked toward the car. "Mrs. Peterson said we're going to start a new science project next week about gravity and motion," Emma said, practically bouncing with excitement. "We get to build things and drop them from different heights to see what happens." Marcus opened the passenger door for her and waited as she climbed in and fastened her seatbelt. The simple act of making sure she was safe and secure had become second nature, but he never took it for granted. Every day with Emma was a gift he'd learned not to waste. As he settled into the driver's seat and started the engine, Marcus glanced at his daughter through the rearview mirror. She was already pulling homework from her backpack, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed math problems that seemed impossibly complex for a second grader. "Dad, can we do something fun this weekend?" Emma asked suddenly, looking up from her worksheet. "Something we've never done before?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Their weekends usually followed a predictable pattern of grocery shopping, laundry, homework, and maybe a trip to the park if the weather cooperated. Fun wasn't something they budgeted for very often, but seeing the hopeful expression on his daughter's face made him want to find a way. "What did you have in mind?" he asked, pulling out of the parking lot and heading toward their small apartment across town. Emma was quiet for a moment, chewing on the end of her pencil as she thought. "I don't know exactly. Maybe something that teaches me a new skill? Like how grown-ups learn things." Marcus felt a tug in his chest at his daughter's words. At 8 years old, Emma was already showing signs of the determination and curiosity that reminded him so much of her mother. Sarah had always been eager to try new experiences, to push boundaries and discover what she was capable of achieving. "You know what?" Marcus said, making a decision that surprised even him. "I saw a flyer at work about a public shooting range that offers beginner classes on weekends. They teach safety and proper technique. It might be interesting to learn something completely new together." Emma's eyes widened with interest. "Like with real guns?" "Yes, but very safely and with trained instructors," Marcus assured her quickly. "It's actually considered a sport, like archery or bowling. People compete in shooting competitions all over the world." The truth was, Marcus had been avoiding anything related to firearms since leaving the military 3 years ago. The memories they carried were complicated, a mixture of pride in his service and pain from the experiences that had ultimately led him to choose civilian life. But watching Emma's face light up with curiosity made him realize that maybe it was time to stop running from that part of his past. "Would you really want to try that with me?" Emma asked, her voice filled with wonder. "If you're interested, then yes," Marcus said, surprised by how much he meant it. "We could make it our weekend adventure." As they drove through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, Marcus found himself thinking about the man he used to be before Emma became his entire world. There had been a time when he'd been confident in ways that had nothing to do with changing diapers or helping with homework. He'd been skilled at things that mattered in a different world, a world he'd left behind to become the father Emma needed. But maybe, just maybe, there was room for both versions of himself to exist. Maybe he could be the dedicated single father and still hold on to the skills and experiences that had shaped him into the man he'd become. Dad? Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Thank you for always being willing to try new things with me. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. In the 2 years since they'd lost Sarah, Emma had never once complained about their simple life or asked why other kids seemed to have more than they did. She'd adapted to their new reality with a grace that humbled him daily. Thank you for making every day an adventure, sweetheart, he replied, his voice thick with love and pride. As they pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex, Marcus made a mental note to research the shooting range Emma had sparked his interest in. It would be good for both of them to step outside their comfort zone and discover something new together. Little did he know that this simple father-daughter bonding idea would soon reveal parts of himself he'd buried so deeply that even he'd almost forgotten they existed. Sometimes the most innocent decisions lead to the most profound moments of truth. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? We'd love to know how this story is reaching you across the globe. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Marcus had spent the previous evening researching Precision Point shooting range, reading reviews and studying their beginner safety courses online while Emma worked on her homework at the kitchen table. The range had excellent ratings for family-friendly instruction and emphasized safety above all else, which put his mind at ease. Emma bounced out of bed earlier than usual, her excitement about their adventure evident in the way she practically vibrated with energy while eating her cereal. She had chosen her outfit carefully, settling on jeans and her favorite purple sweatshirt, declaring that she wanted to look serious and responsible for her first shooting lesson. The drive to Precision Point took them through a part of town Marcus rarely visited, past strip malls and auto repair shops until they reached a low-slung brick building with a simple sign and an American flag fluttering in the morning breeze. The parking lot was already half full, mostly with pickup trucks and SUVs that spoke to the range's regular clientele. Marcus felt his palms grow slightly damp as he turned off the engine. It had been 3 years since he'd held a firearm, 3 years since he'd made the conscious decision to leave that part of his life behind. But as he looked at Emma's eager face, he reminded himself that this was about giving his daughter a new experience, not about revisiting his own complicated past. The interior of Precision Point was cleaner and more professional than Marcus had expected. Glass cases displayed various firearms and accessories, while safety posters covered the walls with reminders about proper handling and range etiquette. The smell of gun oil and cleaning solvent brought back a rush of memories that Marcus quickly pushed aside. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and the kind of confident posture that suggested military background. Her name tag read Sarah Williams, owner and chief instructor. She looked up as they approached, her expression warm but assessing. "Good morning," Sarah said with a genuine smile. "First time here?" "Yes ma'am," Marcus replied, his hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. "We saw your information about beginner classes. My daughter expressed interest in learning about shooting as a sport." Sarah's attention shifted to Emma, who stepped forward with the kind of polite confidence Marcus had worked hard to instill in her. "Hi, I'm Emma. I'm 8 years old and I want to learn how to be really good at something new." "Well, Emma, I think we can definitely help with that," Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "Shooting is all about patience, focus, and respect for safety. Those are good skills to have in life, not just at the range." As Sarah explained the basics of their family introduction package, Marcus found himself studying the other people in the lobby. Most looked like experienced shooters, carrying their own equipment cases and discussing modifications and competitions with the casual expertise of serious hobbyists. He couldn't help but feel out of place in his weekend clothes, looking every inch the inexperienced amateur he was pretending to be. A group of men near the ammunition display caught his attention, their voices carrying just loud enough for him to overhear fragments of conversation about precision shooting and upcoming competitions. One man in particular, wearing expensive tactical gear and sporting a carefully groomed beard, seemed to be holding court with stories of his latest scores and equipment purchases. "The key is having the right tools," the man was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being the expert in the room. "You can't expect amateur equipment to deliver professional results. It's all about precision engineering and understanding ballistics." Marcus turned his attention back to Sarah, who was explaining range rules and safety protocols to Emma with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching. Emma listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about eye protection and hearing safety that made Marcus proud of her mature approach to the lesson. "We'll start you both in lane 1, Sarah said, leading them toward the range entrance. "It's closest to the instructor station, and we can take our time with proper form and safety before you take your first shots." As they walked through the range door, the sound of gunfire from the active lanes made Emma jump slightly, but she quickly composed herself and stayed close to Marcus. The range itself was well lit and spacious, with clear sight lines and excellent ventilation. Marcus noted the professional setup with approval, recognizing quality construction when he saw it. Lane 1 was indeed perfect for beginners, positioned where Sarah could easily monitor their progress while maintaining a clear view of the entire range. She set up paper targets at the 7-yard line and began demonstrating proper stance and grip technique with an unloaded training pistol. "Remember, Emma, the gun is always loaded until you personally verify it's not," Sarah explained, showing the proper way to check the chamber and magazine. "This is the most important rule, and it never changes, no matter how experienced you become." Marcus watched his daughter absorb every detail with the intense concentration she usually reserved for particularly challenging math problems. Emma's questions were thoughtful and showed genuine respect for the seriousness of what they were learning, which filled Marcus with quiet pride. As Sarah continued the safety briefing, Marcus became aware that they had attracted some attention from shooters in nearby lanes. The man with the expensive gear from the lobby had positioned himself 2 lanes over and was making no effort to hide his amusement at the obvious beginners receiving instruction. Marcus chose to ignore the whispered comments and barely concealed smirks, focusing instead on Emma's excitement and Sarah's patient teaching. This was about his daughter's experience, not about proving anything to strangers who had already decided they didn't belong. The whispered comments from the neighboring lanes grew more audible as Sarah continued Emma's safety instruction. Marcus tried to maintain focus on his daughter, but the increasingly pointed remarks were becoming impossible to ignore. The man with the expensive tactical gear had been joined by 2 companions, and their conversation seemed deliberately designed to carry across the range. "I don't know why they let complete amateurs on the same range as serious shooters," the bearded man said, his voice pitched just loud enough to be clearly heard. "This isn't a carnival game. Some of us are here for actual training." His companions chuckled in agreement, one of them adding, "Yeah, Derek, maybe we should suggest they try laser tag instead. Probably more their speed." Derek Morrison, as Marcus now knew him to be, adjusted his shooting glasses and checked his custom pistol with theatrical precision. "I've been shooting competitively for 15 years. Set 3 state records last season. When I see people treating this like a weekend hobby, it's honestly disrespectful to the sport." Emma looked up from the training pistol she was learning to hold properly, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad, are we doing something wrong?" she whispered. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same protective instinct that had kept him awake countless nights worrying about Emma's safety and happiness. He knelt down beside his daughter, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "You're doing everything perfectly, sweetheart," he assured her, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "Some people think they own places like this, but everyone has the right to learn safely. Just focus on what Sarah is teaching you." Sarah Williams had clearly overheard the exchange, and Marcus noticed the way her jaw tightened as she glanced toward Derek's group. As a range owner, she was probably accustomed to dealing with ego-driven customers who forgot that everyone started as a beginner once. "Emma, "You're showing excellent listening skills and safety awareness," Sarah said, her voice carrying far enough for the neighboring lanes to hear. "Those are the most important qualities in any shooter, regardless of experience level." Derek's response was immediate and cutting. "Safety awareness is great, but it doesn't make up for lack of natural ability. Some people just aren't cut out for precision sports. Better to find that out early than waste everyone's time." Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily. 3 years of working mall security had taught him patience with difficult people, but watching someone dismiss his daughter's effort struck a nerve that ran deeper than professional courtesy. Emma was trying so hard to do everything right, approaching this new challenge with the same determination she brought to her schoolwork and everything else in her young life. "Is that man talking about us?" Emma asked, her voice smaller now, some of her initial excitement dimming. "Don't worry about him, honey," Marcus said, though he could feel his own composure starting to fray. "We're here to learn and have fun together. That's all that matters." But Derek wasn't finished. As Sarah moved to retrieve ammunition for their first live-fire exercise, he stepped closer to the dividing wall between lanes, ostensibly to adjust his shooting position but clearly positioning himself to continue his commentary. "You know what I find funny?" Derek said to his companions, his voice now unmistakably directed at Marcus and Emma. "People think they can just walk in here with no experience, no proper equipment, and somehow magically develop skills that take years to master. It's like watching someone try to paint a masterpiece with crayons." One of his friends, a thin man with nervous laughter, chimed in, "Maybe they saw too many action movies. Think it's all point and shoot." Derek nodded sagely, warming to his theme. "Exactly. Real marksmanship is about understanding ballistics, breathing control, trigger discipline, sight alignment. It's a science. You can't just fake your way through it with beginner's luck." Marcus stood slowly, his full height and the breadth of his shoulders suddenly more apparent. Even in civilian clothes, even trying to blend in as just another amateur, there was something in his posture that suggested depths Derek hadn't bothered to consider. "Emma," Marcus said quietly, "why don't you ask Sarah about the different types of targets while I step over here for a moment?" Sarah, who had been observing the escalating tension with growing concern, immediately moved to engage Emma in conversation about target scoring systems. Marcus appreciated her quick thinking and protective instincts toward his daughter. Derek seemed to take Marcus's approach as validation of his authority, straightening his shoulders and preparing to deliver what he clearly expected to be a decisive lecture about range etiquette and knowing one's place. "Look, no offense intended," Derek began, his tone suggesting that offense was exactly what he intended, "but this really isn't the place for father-daughter bonding activities. We're trying to maintain serious training standards here." Marcus stopped just close enough to speak without raising his voice, his expression calm but his eyes holding something that made Derek's companions suddenly find their equipment very interesting to examine. "My daughter is here to learn," Marcus said simply, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that Derek's bluster couldn't match. "She's following all safety protocols and showing more respect for the range than some people twice her age." Derek's carefully groomed beard couldn't hide the flush that crept up his neck. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already categorized as an amateur. "Respect doesn't put bullets on target," Derek shot back. "This is about skill, not good intentions. Maybe you should consider starting with something more appropriate for beginners. I hear the arcade down the street has some nice shooting games." The insult hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, but a recognition that sometimes backing down only encouraged bullies to push harder. Emma was watching from across the lane, and he realized this was about more than just shooting lessons. Marcus returned to Emma's side with deliberate calm, though Sarah caught something in his movement that made her study him more carefully. There was a fluidity to the way he positioned himself, a natural economy of motion that didn't quite match the hesitant amateur he was supposed to be. "Are you ready to try your first shots, sweetheart?" Marcus asked Emma, his voice gentle despite the tension that still hummed between the lanes. Emma nodded eagerly, though she cast a quick glance toward Derek's group before focusing on the pistol Sarah was preparing for her. The weapon was a small-caliber target pistol, perfect for beginners, with minimal recoil and excellent accuracy potential for someone learning proper fundamentals. "Remember everything we talked about," Sarah said, guiding Emma through the loading process step by step. "Stance first, then grip, then sight alignment. Don't worry about hitting the center right away. We're building good habits." As Emma took her position, Marcus moved to stand slightly behind and to her right, the textbook instructor position for safety and guidance. Without thinking, his hands came up to make small adjustments to her stance, his touch sure and precise as he helped her find the natural point of aim. "Feet shoulder-width apart, just like that," Marcus said softly, his hands guiding Emma's posture with the kind of instinctive knowledge that comes from years of training others. "Now let your body find its balance. The gun should point naturally at the target without you having to force it." Sarah watched Marcus work with Emma, her experienced eye noting things that the casual observer might miss. The way his hands positioned Emma's shoulders was exactly right. His understanding of natural point of aim was sophisticated. When he demonstrated proper grip pressure, his own hands showed the subtle calluses and muscle memory of someone who had spent considerable time with firearms. "Breathe normally," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who had given these instructions before. "When you're ready to shoot, take a breath, let half of it out, then hold and squeeze the trigger straight back. Don't jerk it. Just apply steady pressure until the gun fires." Emma followed his guidance with careful concentration, her small hands steady on the pistol grip. When she fired her first shot, the report was sharp but controlled, and she remained perfectly balanced, not flinching or pulling away from the weapon. "Excellent form," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "Emma, that was a textbook first shot. And Marcus, your instruction technique is very good. Have you taught shooting before?" Marcus felt a moment of internal conflict, the old instinct to deflect and remain invisible warring with pride in Emma's performance. "Just trying to remember what you showed us," he said carefully. But Derek had been watching too, and his competitive nature made him incapable of allowing credit to go where it wasn't deserved in his opinion. "Beginner's luck," he called out dismissively. "One good shot doesn't mean anything. Let's see if she can do it again." Emma looked up at her father, uncertainty creeping into her expression. "What if I can't do it again, Dad?" Marcus knelt down beside his daughter, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the mall security guard persona he usually wore. "You can do it again, Emma. You have good natural instincts, and you're listening to instruction. That's all any shooter really needs." As Emma prepared for her second shot, Marcus found himself falling into patterns of observation and analysis that he tried to leave behind. Without consciously thinking about it, he noted the wind indicators hanging from the range ceiling, assessed the lighting conditions on the target, and calculated the slight adjustments that would optimize Emma's success. "Just a tiny bit higher with your front sight," he murmured, his hand making the smallest adjustment to Emma's grip. "Line it up so the front sight sits right in the middle of the rear notch, and the top of the front sight is even with the top of the rear sight." Emma made the adjustment and fired again. This shot struck even closer to the center of the target, and she turned to Marcus with a brilliant smile that made his heart swell with pride. "I did it, Dad. I really did it." "You absolutely did," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a natural, sweetheart." Sarah was now watching Marcus with undisguised curiosity. His terminology was too precise, his adjustments too confident, his teaching style too polished for someone learning alongside his daughter. She had trained enough military personnel over the years to recognize the signs, even when someone was trying to hide them. Derek, however, was becoming increasingly agitated by Emma's success and Marcus's competent instruction. In his worldview, beginners were supposed to struggle, to acknowledge their inexperience and defer to his expertise. The fact that this amateur father was producing better results with his daughter than many of Derek's students achieved rankled him deeply. "Lucky coaching," Derek muttered, but loud enough to be heard. Anyone can repeat what an instructor tells them. The real test is when you have to perform under pressure, when someone who actually knows what they're doing is watching. Marcus felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders. He could continue to deflect and minimize, to protect the quiet life he'd built for himself and Emma. Or he could allow Derek to continue undermining his daughter's confidence and joy in her accomplishment. Emma was already preparing for her third shot, her movements becoming more natural and confident with each repetition. Marcus realized that this moment was about more than shooting. It was about teaching his daughter that competence and quiet dignity were worth more than loud boasting, that true skill spoke for itself without needing to diminish others. "Take your time, Emma," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new note of authority. "Show them what careful practice and good instruction can accomplish." As Emma lined up her sights, Marcus caught Sarah's eye and saw recognition dawning in her expression. She had figured out that there was more to Marcus Chen than met the eye, and her slight nod told him that his secret was safe with someone who understood the value of letting skills speak louder than words. Emma's third shot struck the target with satisfying precision, creating a tight grouping that would have impressed experienced shooters. Her face glowed with accomplishment as she carefully set the pistol down and turned to Marcus for approval. The pride in her father's eyes was worth more than any trophy she could have won. "Look at that grouping," Sarah said with genuine admiration, using the range's spotting scope to examine Emma's target. 3 shots within a 2-inch circle at 7 yards. That's outstanding for anyone, let alone a first-time shooter. Derek's jaw tightened as he observed the target through his own high-end spotting scope. The precision was undeniable, and it challenged everything he believed about natural talent and proper training progression. In his experience, beginners were supposed to spray bullets all over the target for weeks before achieving this kind of consistency. "Must be the equipment," Derek said loudly, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone whose worldview was being threatened. "Sometimes rental guns are sighted in perfectly for one specific distance. Probably just luck that she's the right height." Marcus felt his patience wearing thin, but Emma's presence kept him anchored to his role as supportive father rather than someone with his own complicated relationship with firearms. He watched his daughter beam with confidence and refused to let Derek's negativity steal this moment from her. "Can I try some more, Dad?" Emma asked, her enthusiasm infectious despite the tension building around them. "I think I'm starting to understand how the sights work." "Of course, sweetheart," Marcus replied, his voice warm with encouragement. "Let's see if we can make that group even tighter." As Sarah prepared another magazine for Emma, Derek made a show of checking his expensive chronograph and adjusting his custom sight system. His friends watched with the kind of nervous attention that suggested they were uncomfortable with his escalating behavior but unwilling to challenge him directly. "You know what bothers me most about situations like this?" Derek announced, ostensibly to his companions but clearly intending for Marcus and Emma to hear every word. "It's not just that amateurs think they can walk in and immediately perform at advanced levels. It's that they bring children into an environment that requires serious focus and discipline." Marcus's hand stilled on the ammunition box he was helping Sarah organize. The criticism of Emma's presence crossed a line that he wasn't willing to tolerate, regardless of the peaceful afternoon he'd planned. "A shooting range isn't a playground," Derek continued, warming to his theme with the passion of someone who believed he was defending sacred principles. "Children don't have the attention span or emotional maturity to handle firearms safely. One moment of distraction, one childish impulse, and someone could get seriously hurt." Emma's smile faded as she processed Derek's words, her 80-year-old mind struggling to understand why someone would think she was dangerous when she'd been so careful to follow every safety rule. She looked up at Marcus with confusion and hurt beginning to cloud her excitement. "Dad, am I doing something wrong?" she asked quietly, her voice small and uncertain in a way that made Marcus's chest tighten with protective fury. "You're doing everything exactly right, Emma," Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying enough authority to make Derek's friends glance over with sudden interest. "Some people forget that they were beginners once too. Some people forget that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their experience level." Derek stepped away from his shooting position and moved closer to the lane divider, his posture aggressive and challenging. Respect has to be earned through demonstrated competence, not handed out like participation trophies. This isn't a day care center. The insult to Emma's maturity and Marcus's parenting was more than either of them could ignore. Sarah stepped forward, clearly intending to intervene as range owner, but Marcus held up a gentle hand to indicate he could handle the situation. "My daughter has shown more discipline and safety awareness in 30 minutes than you've shown in the last hour," Marcus said, his voice level but carrying an undertone that made Derek's bravado falter slightly. "She's here to learn, and she's learning well. If that threatens you somehow, maybe you should examine why." Derek's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Being challenged by someone he'd categorized as an inexperienced amateur was humiliating enough, but being challenged in front of his friends and other range customers was intolerable. "Threatened?" Derek laughed harshly. "By a mall cop and his kid playing dress-up with real guns? You want to talk about competence? Let's see what happens when you try to shoot something more challenging than a paper target at point-blank range." The challenge hung in the air between them, and Marcus felt the familiar shift in his awareness that came when conflict became inevitable. Emma was still watching with wide eyes, and he realized that how he handled this moment would teach her important lessons about standing up for herself and others. Sarah moved closer to Marcus, her voice low and concerned. "You don't have to respond to him. I can ask him to leave if his behavior continues." Marcus appreciated Sarah's support, but he recognized that backing down would only confirm Derek's assumptions about amateur shooters and inexperienced fathers. More importantly, it would teach Emma that bullies should be appeased rather than confronted with quiet dignity. "What kind of challenge did you have in mind?" Marcus asked calmly, his tone suggesting mild curiosity rather than acceptance of Derek's implicit insult. What would you do in Marcus's situation when someone challenges your child's right to learn something new? Share your thoughts with us wherever you're watching from around the world tonight. Derek's eyes lit up with the anticipation of an easy victory. He had maneuvered the situation exactly where he wanted it, positioned to demonstrate his superiority in front of an audience that would finally recognize his expertise and authority. "Something that separates the real shooters from the lucky amateurs," Derek said with smug confidence. "Something that requires actual skill instead of beginner's coaching." Sarah Williams had been running precision point shooting range for 12 years, and in that time she developed an eye for reading people that served her well in managing both customers and situations. As Derek positioned himself for what he clearly expected to be a demonstration of superiority, Sarah found herself studying Marcus with the kind of professional assessment that had once been second nature during her own military service. The way Marcus held himself had changed subtly since Derek's challenge was issued. His shoulders were still relaxed, but there was something in his posture that suggested readiness rather than casual confidence. His hands, which had been gentle and careful when helping Emma, now showed the slight tension of someone preparing for action. Most telling of all was his breathing, which had shifted into the controlled rhythm that Sarah recognized from her own sniper training years ago. "Derek, maybe we should just let everyone enjoy their range time," Sarah suggested diplomatically, though her attention remained focused on Marcus's reaction to the developing situation. Derek waved off her concern with the dismissive gesture of someone accustomed to getting his way through persistence and intimidation. "This will just take a minute, Sarah. Sometimes people need a reality check about their actual skill level before they get overconfident and dangerous." Emma had moved closer to Marcus, her small hand finding his larger one for comfort and reassurance. The gesture reminded Sarah why she'd gotten into the instruction business in the first place, the simple joy of helping people discover their capabilities in a safe and supportive environment. Derek's behavior was everything she tried to prevent at her range. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the kind of measured calm that Sarah associated with people who'd been in real high-stress situations before. Derek's smile was predatory as he gestured toward the far end of the range, where targets could be positioned at distances up to 100 yards. "How about we see how you handle something that requires actual precision? 50-yard target, standing position, no support. 5 shots for score." Sarah felt her eyebrows rise slightly. 50 yards was a challenging distance even for experienced shooters, especially in the standing position without any artificial support. Derek was essentially setting Marcus up for public failure, which would humiliate both father and daughter and prove his point about amateurs overestimating their abilities. "That seems excessive for someone who's supposed to be learning," Sarah interjected, but Marcus raised his hand gently to indicate he could speak for himself. 50 yards is fine, Marcus said simply, his tone carrying no bravado or false confidence. "What are you shooting?" Derek's chest swelled with pride as he gestured toward his custom pistol, a precision-built competition gun that probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months of mall security work. "Springfield TRP operator, match-grade barrel, custom trigger job, competition sights." "What about you?" Marcus glanced at the rental pistols available at the range counter, his eyes settling on a basic model that was well-maintained but far from competition-grade equipment. "Whatever Sarah recommends for the rental fleet." Sarah found herself caught between concern for Marcus's dignity and growing curiosity about what exactly she was witnessing. Something about this situation felt familiar, like watching a chess master allow an amateur to choose the opening move before demonstrating the difference between confidence and competence. "Marcus, you don't have to do this," Sarah said quietly, stepping closer so Emma couldn't overhear. "Derek's been shooting competitively for years. He's got thousands of dollars in custom equipment. This isn't a fair comparison." Marcus looked down at Emma, who was watching the adults with the kind of serious attention that suggested she understood more than they might expect. "What do you think, sweetheart? Should we show Derek what careful practice and good fundamentals can accomplish?" Emma's smile returned, bright and trusting. "I think you can do anything, Dad." The simple faith in her voice made Sarah's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. There was something profound about the relationship between this father and daughter, a bond built on mutual respect and genuine affection that Derek's posturing couldn't touch. "All right then," Sarah said, making a decision that surprised even her. "Let's set up the targets." As she walked toward the target controls, Sarah found herself remembering her own military training and the instructors who'd taught her that equipment could enhance skill but never replace it. The best shooters she'd known during her Army days had been able to perform with whatever weapon was available, adapting to circumstances rather than relying on perfect conditions. Derek was already positioning himself at the 50-yard line, making adjustments to his expensive sight system and checking his stance with the theatrical precision of someone performing for an audience. His friends had moved closer to watch, along with several other range customers who'd been drawn by the developing competition. Marcus selected a basic Glock 17 from the rental fleet, a reliable service pistol that was functional rather than fancy. Sarah watched as he performed a routine inspection of the weapon, his movements economical and practiced in a way that suggested deep familiarity with the type rather than just this specific gun. "Standard paper targets?" Marcus asked, his voice still calm despite the growing crowd of spectators. "Bullseye targets," Derek replied smugly. 10-ring scoring, 5 shots each. Highest total score wins. Sarah positioned fresh targets at the 50-yard line and activated the retrieval system. The distance looked imposing even to her experienced eye, and she found herself hoping that Marcus understood what he was getting into. As she walked back toward the firing line, Sarah caught sight of Emma's expression. The 80-year-old was watching her father with complete confidence, as if she'd never doubted for a moment that he could handle whatever challenge Derek presented. That kind of trust spoke to experiences and observations that went beyond weekend shooting lessons. "Gentlemen, whenever you're ready," Sarah announced, though she kept her voice neutral despite her growing sense that this competition might not go the way Derek expected. The range fell quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of shooting from other lanes. Marcus stood beside Derek at the firing line, two very different men preparing to demonstrate their understanding of precision shooting under pressure. Sarah found herself holding her breath, not just for the outcome of the competition, but for what it might reveal about the quiet man who'd walked into her range that morning with his daughter and a simple desire to try something new together. The shooting line felt different now, charged with the kind of tension that transforms casual range time into something more significant. Word of the impromptu competition had spread among the other shooters, and nearly everyone had paused their own practice to witness what most expected to be a predictable demonstration of experience over amateur enthusiasm. Derek took his position first, making a show of adjusting his stance and checking his equipment one final time. His custom Springfield gleamed under the range lights, every component optimized for accuracy and performance. He wore shooting glasses that probably cost more than most people spent on their entire first shooting experience, and his grip on the pistol was textbook perfect, refined through years of competitive training. "I'll go first to set the standard," Derek announced, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never doubted the outcome. 5 shots, 50 yards, standing unsupported. Let's see what 15 years of serious training can accomplish. Marcus stood quietly beside him, the rental Glock looking almost plain in his hands. There was no ceremony in his preparation, no adjustment of expensive equipment or positioning for the audience. He simply checked the pistol's function with economical movements and waited for Derek to begin. Emma had positioned herself where she could see both shooters clearly, her hands clasped in front of her with nervous excitement. Sarah noticed that the little girl showed no doubt about her father's abilities, despite being surrounded by adults who clearly expected Derek to dominate the competition. Derek raised his pistol with practiced precision, his breathing settling into the controlled rhythm of competitive shooting. The range fell silent as he aligned his sights on the distant target, taking the time to ensure a perfect sight picture before beginning his string of shots. His first shot cracked across the range with authority, followed by 4 more in measured succession. Each shot was deliberate and controlled, the result of thousands of hours of practice and refined technique. When he finished, Derek lowered his weapon with obvious satisfaction, confident that he'd delivered a performance worthy of his reputation. "Let's see what we've got," Sarah said, activating the target retrieval system to bring Derek's target forward for scoring. The result was impressive by any reasonable standard. 4 shots clustered tightly in the 8 and 9 rings, with one shot catching the edge of the 10 ring for a total score of 43 out of a possible 50. It was the kind of shooting that would win most amateur competitions and certainly demonstrated Derek's legitimate skill with a firearm. 43, Sarah announced, and Derek's friends responded with appreciative murmurs and congratulations. "Not bad for warm-up conditions," Derek said with false modesty, though his chest swelled with pride at the reaction from the gathered spectators. "The lighting's a bit tricky at this distance, but that's what separates the serious shooters from the casual plinkers." He turned toward Marcus with the smile of someone who'd just established an insurmountable standard. "Your turn, Mall Cop. Don't feel bad if you can't match that. It takes years to develop that kind of consistency." Marcus stepped up to the firing line, and Sarah noticed something she'd missed before. The way he positioned his feet wasn't quite the standard competitive stance she was used to seeing. It was more practical, more tactical, as if optimized for real-world shooting rather than range conditions. His grip on the Glock was rock solid but relaxed, suggesting muscle memory that ran deeper than weekend practice. "Take your time," Derek called out helpfully. "Shooting under pressure is different from plinking at close range. No shame in learning your limitations." Emma stepped forward slightly, her young voice carrying clearly across the range. "You can do it, Dad. I believe in you." Marcus looked down at his daughter and smiled, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression. The careful restraint he'd maintained all morning seemed to ease slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. As if he'd finally decided to stop hiding. "Thank you, sweetheart," Marcus said softly. "Sometimes we all need someone to believe in us." He raised the Glock with movements that were suddenly different, more fluid and natural than anything Sarah had seen from him during Emma's lesson. His stance settled into something that spoke of training that went far beyond civilian marksmanship, and his breathing pattern shifted into the deep, controlled rhythm that Sarah recognized from her own sniper training. The first shot came faster than Derek had fired, but with no sense of rush or haste. It was followed by 4 more in a steady cadence that suggested supreme confidence in his ability to deliver consistent results. Marcus never seemed to pause to check his sight picture or adjust his aim, firing with the kind of smooth efficiency that came from having performed this exact skill countless times under much more demanding circumstances. When he finished, Marcus lowered the Glock and stepped back from the line, his expression calm and unreadable. The range was utterly silent, everyone waiting for the target to return and reveal whether the quiet mall security guard had managed to embarrass himself or surprise them all. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated your abilities? Tell us about it in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from around the world. Sarah activated the target retrieval system, her own heart racing with anticipation. As Derek's target had returned, she'd felt confident that Marcus was facing an impossible standard. But watching him shoot had triggered every instinct she developed during her military career, instincts that told her she was about to witness something exceptional. The target emerged from the retrieval system, and Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Even from a distance, she could see that something extraordinary had happened at 50 yards. Derek's confident smile began to fade as he leaned forward to get a better look at Marcus's target, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion to something approaching disbelief. The target came into view slowly, the mechanical hum of the retrieval system the only sound in the suddenly quiet range. As the paper grew larger, what had seemed impossible from 50 yards away became undeniably clear. 5 holes were punched through the center of the bullseye in a group so tight that they appeared to overlap, creating a single ragged opening where the 10 ring used to be. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she examined the target more closely. Not only had Marcus achieved 5 perfect 10s, but the grouping was smaller than what most competition shooters could manage at half the distance. It was the kind of precision that spoke to training that went far beyond civilian marksmanship courses or weekend hobby shooting. "Perfect 50, Sarah announced, her voice barely above a whisper, then louder as the reality sank in. 5 shots, all 10s. Perfect score." The silence that followed was profound, the kind of quiet that falls when everyone present realizes they've witnessed something far beyond their expectations. Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound, his brain struggling to process what had just occurred. His friends shifted uncomfortably, no longer sure what they were supposed to be witnessing. Emma broke the silence with a squeal of delight, clapping her hands and bouncing on her toes. "Daddy, you did it! You got all 10s. She ran to Marcus and wrapped her arms around his waist, her face glowing with pride and vindication. Marcus knelt down to hug his daughter, and Sarah caught the expression on his face in that unguarded moment. There was love and pride, certainly, but also something that looked like relief. As if he'd been carrying a burden for years and had finally allowed himself to set it down, even if only for a moment. "How?" Derek managed to stammer, his voice cracking slightly. "How is that even possible? You said you were beginners. You're a mall security guard." Marcus stood slowly, his hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet authority that hadn't been there during the morning's instruction, as if he'd finally stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. "I am a mall security guard," Marcus said simply. "I'm also Emma's father, and that's the most important thing about me. But you're right that I have some experience with firearms." Sarah stepped closer, her military instincts now fully engaged. The grouping on that target wasn't just good shooting, it was expert-level marksmanship that required years of intensive training to achieve. The kind of training that suggested military or law enforcement background at the highest levels. "What kind of experience?" Sarah asked gently, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Emma's expectant face before making a decision that clearly didn't come easily. "Army. Sniper qualified. I served 3 tours overseas before I decided that being Emma's full-time father was more important than any other job I could do." The admission hung in the air like a revealed secret, explaining everything about the morning's events in a single sentence. Derek's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to embarrassment to something approaching horror as he realized he'd been mocking a decorated veteran. "You were a sniper?" Derek whispered, his voice small and uncertain now. "Among other things," Marcus replied, his tone neither boastful nor apologetic. But that was a long time ago. Now I work security at Westfield Mall and help Emma with her homework every night. That's who I am now. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The way Marcus moved, his unconscious knowledge of shooting fundamentals, his calm under pressure, and most importantly, his reluctance to engage in Derek's challenge until his daughter's feelings were at stake. He'd been protecting not just his identity but his new life as a civilian father. "Why didn't you say anything?" Derek asked, though his tone had shifted from aggressive to something approaching respect. Marcus looked at Derek for a long moment before answering. "Because I came here to give my daughter a new experience, not to prove anything to anyone. Emma wanted to learn something new, and I wanted to support that. Your opinion of my qualifications wasn't really relevant to what we were trying to accomplish." Emma tugged on Marcus's shirt to get his attention. "Dad, does this mean you were a soldier like the ones in my history books?" "I was a soldier, yes," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level again. "But being your father is a much more important job, and it's the one I'm proudest of." The crowd of spectators had grown during the competition, and now they were witnessing something far more significant than a shooting contest. They were seeing a man who'd deliberately chosen quiet dignity over public recognition, who'd built a new identity around the most important role he could imagine. Derek's expensive equipment suddenly seemed less impressive, his competitive credentials diminished by the realization that he'd been competing against someone who'd used these skills in situations where missing meant consequences far more serious than a lower score on a paper target. "I owe you an apology," Derek said finally, his voice subdued. "I made assumptions about you and your daughter that were completely unfair. You both handled this with more class than I showed." Marcus extended his hand to Derek, who shook it with genuine respect. "Apology accepted. We're all here to enjoy shooting and maybe learn something new. No reason we can't do that together." Sarah watched this exchange with growing admiration for Marcus's character. Even after demonstrating his superior skill, he was offering Derek a graceful way to save face and move forward. It was the kind of leadership that she remembered from the best officers she'd served with during her own military career. "Marcus," Sarah said, stepping forward with a proposition that had been forming in her mind since the target revealed his true abilities. "I wonder if I could speak with you privately for a moment. I have something I'd like to discuss." As they walked toward her office, Sarah found herself thinking about the opportunities that sometimes presented themselves when you least expected them, and about the kind of man who would hide his extraordinary abilities in order to focus on being an ordinary father. Sarah's office was a small space behind the main counter, filled with certificates, military memorabilia, and photographs that told the story of a life dedicated to marksmanship and service. Marcus noticed a framed Purple Heart among the displays, along with several competition trophies and what appeared to be a unit citation from the 82nd Airborne Division. "You served too," Marcus observed, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk while keeping an eye on Emma through the office window. His daughter was examining the various target types available at the range counter, her earlier excitement undimmed by the morning's drama. 12 years Army, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan, Sarah confirmed, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a small machine in the corner. "I opened this place when I got out because I wanted to create the kind of training environment I wished I'd had access to before deployment. Somewhere that focused on real fundamentals instead of ego and expensive equipment." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully, noting the way Sarah moved with the same unconscious efficiency he recognized in himself and other veterans. There was a shared understanding between them that didn't require explanation, born from experiences that civilian life couldn't quite replicate. "I can tell you understand what it's like to transition from military service to civilian life," Sarah continued, sitting down across from him. "Especially when you have skills that set you apart but don't necessarily fit into normal career paths." Through the window, Marcus watched Derek attempting to strike up a conversation with Emma about different types of ammunition. To his credit, Derek's demeanor had completely changed since the revelation of Marcus's background, and he was speaking to Emma with the kind of respect he should have shown from the beginning. "It's been an adjustment," Marcus admitted. "Figuring out how to be the father Emma needs while still being true to who I am." Some days I wonder if I'm doing either one well enough." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. "Marcus, I've been running this range for 3 years now, and I've never seen shooting like what you demonstrated out there. That wasn't just military training, that was exceptional skill maintained at an elite level. How often do you practice?" The question made Marcus uncomfortable, touching on something he'd been avoiding thinking about for months. "I don't, really. Maybe once or twice a year when I need to requalify for my security job. I've been trying to leave that part of my life behind." "But you haven't lost any of your ability," Sarah pointed out. "Muscle memory like that doesn't just happen. You were special operations, weren't you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma's animated conversation with Derek about the differences between target shooting and practical marksmanship. His daughter's ability to find common ground with someone who'd been dismissive of her earlier impressed him, and reminded him of her mother's gift for seeing the best in people. "Special Forces, yes," Marcus said finally. "Designated marksman for my team. After my wife died, I decided that Emma needed a father who came home every night, not one who disappeared for months at a time on deployments she couldn't know about." Sarah nodded with understanding. "That's a hell of a sacrifice. But Marcus, I want to propose something that might let you have both. I've been looking for someone to help me develop an advanced marksmanship program here. Not just competition shooting, but practical skills for law enforcement and military personnel preparing for deployment." The offer hung between them, representing possibilities that Marcus had convinced himself he no longer wanted. But as he watched Emma through the window, he realized that his daughter's pride in his abilities might be worth more than the safety of complete anonymity. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "what happened out there today shows me that you haven't really left that part of yourself behind. You've just been keeping it locked away. Emma seems proud of your skills, not scared of them." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared in the office doorway, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, Mr. Derek wants to know if you could show everyone how to shoot at the really long targets. He says some of the other people here have never seen anything like what you did." Marcus looked at his daughter's hopeful expression, then at Sarah's encouraging nod, and felt something shift in his chest. Maybe there was a way to honor both parts of his life without sacrificing either one. "What kind of demonstration did you have in mind?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Derek appeared behind Emma, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. "Sarah has targets that can be positioned out to 100 yards. Most of us have never attempted anything at that distance. If you're willing to show us what's possible with proper technique, we'd all like to learn." Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking the range, where several shooters had gathered near the longer lanes, their conversations animated and expectant. For 3 years, he defined himself entirely through his role as Emma's father, convinced that any display of his former abilities would somehow compromise the life he'd built for them. But watching the genuine interest and respect on the faces of people who'd witnessed his shooting, Marcus began to understand that he might have been protecting himself more than protecting Emma. His daughter had never shown anything but pride in his capabilities, whether it was fixing her bicycle or helping with homework or apparently demonstrating expert marksmanship. 100 yards is a significant challenge, Marcus said slowly, his mind already calculating wind conditions and sight adjustments. Especially with a standard pistol and no magnified optics. Sarah smiled with the expression of someone who'd successfully identified exactly the right challenge. "Which is why it would be such a valuable demonstration. Show them what's possible when fundamentals are applied correctly under difficult conditions." Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve to get his attention. "Will you do it, Dad? I want to see what you can really do when you're not holding back." The innocent honesty in her voice made Marcus realize that his 80-year-old daughter had understood something about the morning's events that he'd been trying to avoid acknowledging. She'd known all along that he'd been restraining himself, and she wanted to see him at his full capability. "All right," Marcus said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. "Let's see what we can accomplish at 100 yards. The atmosphere in the range had transformed completely as word spread about the upcoming demonstration. Shooters from every lane had gathered near the 100-yard position, their own practice forgotten in anticipation of witnessing something extraordinary. Even experienced marksmen rarely attempted precision shooting at that distance with a pistol, and none of them had ever seen anything like Marcus's 50-yard performance. Sarah worked the target controls to position a fresh bullseye at the maximum range, the paper target appearing impossibly small at 100 yards. Through the spotting scope, she could make out the scoring rings, but to the naked eye, the target looked like little more than a white dot against the backstop. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced to the gathered crowd, "what we're about to witness is an example of what's possible when fundamental marksmanship skills are developed to their highest level. 100 yards with a standard service pistol is considered an extremely challenging shot even for competition shooters." Marcus stood at the firing line, the same rental Glock 17 in his hands that he'd used for the earlier demonstration. He'd made no requests for special equipment or modifications, content to work with what was available. Emma positioned herself where she could see both her father and the distant target, her hands clasped together with nervous excitement. Derek had appointed himself as unofficial commentator for the crowd, his earlier antagonism replaced by genuine admiration and curiosity. For those who might not understand the difficulty, he explained to the gathered shooters, at 100 yards, a tiny movement of the pistol results in massive changes at the target. Wind, breathing, even your heartbeat can throw off the shot. Marcus began his preparation with the methodical approach of someone who performed this type of shooting under much more demanding circumstances. He studied the wind indicators hanging from the ceiling, noting the slight air movement that would affect bullet trajectory. His breathing settled into the deep, controlled pattern that would provide the stable platform necessary for extreme precision. "The key to long-range pistol shooting," Marcus said quietly, though his voice carried to the assembled crowd, "is accepting that the equipment has limitations, and working within them rather than fighting them. This pistol wasn't designed for 100-yard precision, but it's capable of more than most people realize." As Marcus raised the Glock into his shooting position, Sarah noticed that his stance had shifted again. This wasn't the casual position he'd used for Emma's instruction or even the controlled stance from the 50-yard demonstration. This was something different, a shooter's position optimized for maximum stability and precision under the most challenging conditions. "Take your time, Dad," Emma called out softly. "I know you can do it." Marcus smiled at his daughter's encouragement, and Sarah saw something in his expression that she hadn't noticed before. For the first time since walking into her range that morning, Marcus looked completely comfortable with who he was. The careful restraint he'd maintained was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone operating in their area of expertise. The range fell silent as Marcus began his final sight picture, the Glock extended in a two-handed grip that appeared rock solid despite the challenging distance. His breathing pattern shifted into the controlled rhythm that Sarah recognized from her own sniper training, the deep cycles that would provide moments of perfect stillness between heartbeats. That moment when someone reveals their true capabilities is always inspiring. Have you ever witnessed someone surprise everyone with hidden talents? Let us know where you're watching from tonight and share your story. The first shot came without warning, the report echoing through the range with authority. Marcus's follow-throw was perfect, holding his sight picture and breathing pattern as if the shot was simply one in a continuous sequence rather than a single challenging attempt. "Spotting," Sarah called out, studying the distant target through her high-powered scope. Even with magnification, it took her a moment to locate the bullet hole. When she found it, her breath caught in her throat. "Center punch," she announced, her voice filled with amazement. "Dead center of the 10 ring." The crowd erupted in appreciative murmurs and quiet applause, but Marcus seemed unaffected by their reaction. He was already preparing for his second shot, his concentration focused entirely on the technical challenge rather than the audience watching his performance. Shot after shot followed in measured succession, each one delivered with the same controlled precision as the first. Marcus never hurried, never showed frustration with the difficulty, never appeared to doubt his ability to deliver consistent results at a distance that challenged the fundamental capabilities of the equipment he was using. Emma watched with growing pride as her father demonstrated skills that went far beyond anything she'd imagined when they decided to try something new together. This was her dad, the man who helped her with homework and made sure she brushed her teeth before bed, but he was also clearly someone who'd mastered abilities that amazed experienced adults. When Marcus finished his 5-shot string and lowered the pistol, the range was completely quiet except for the hum of the target retrieval system bringing his results back for scoring. Derek stood with his mouth slightly open, his expensive equipment suddenly seeming irrelevant compared to what he'd just witnessed. "I've been shooting for 15 years, Derek said quietly, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "I've never seen anything like that. How is that even possible?" Marcus set the Glock down carefully and turned to face the assembled crowd, his expression calm but carrying a new openness that hadn't been there at the beginning of the day. "Training and practice, but mostly understanding that the fundamentals never change, regardless of the distance or circumstances. Everything else is just variables to account for." As the target reached the firing line, Sarah examined it with the detailed attention of someone who understood exactly what she was seeing. 5 shots, all contained within the 10 ring, in a group that measured less than 2 inches at 100 yards. It was the kind of shooting that would have been impressive with a precision rifle, and was simply extraordinary with a service pistol. "Perfect 50 again," Sarah announced, her voice carrying a mixture of professional admiration and personal pride in having witnessed something truly exceptional. "Ladies and gentlemen, that is world-class marksmanship with standard equipment." Emma ran to her father and wrapped her arms around his waist, her face glowing with unconditional pride and love. "Daddy, that was amazing. You're the best shooter in the whole world." Marcus knelt down to hug his daughter, and Sarah caught the expression on his face in that moment of pure connection. He had finally stopped hiding from who he was, and his daughter's joy in his abilities had made it clear that he'd been protecting something that never needed protection in the first place. The silence that followed Marcus's perfect 100-yard performance held a quality that Sarah had rarely experienced in her years of running the range. It wasn't just the quiet appreciation of skilled shooting, but something deeper, the recognition that everyone present had witnessed something extraordinary that transcended mere marksmanship. Derek was the first to speak, his voice subdued and thoughtful. "In 15 years of competitive shooting, I've never seen precision like that. Not even from Olympic-level competitors with custom equipment designed specifically for that distance." Marcus remained focused on Emma, whose excitement was infectious as she bounced on her toes and peppered him with questions about how he'd learned to shoot so accurately. But Sarah noticed the way other shooters were looking at him now, with the kind of respect reserved for true masters of their craft. "Marcus," Sarah said, stepping forward with decision evident in her voice, "I need to make you an offer that I hope you'll seriously consider. What you've demonstrated today isn't just exceptional shooting, it's the kind of expertise that could change lives." The crowd around them had grown to include every person in the facility, from experienced competitive shooters to complete beginners who'd been taking their first safety courses. All of them understood that they'd witnessed something special, even if they couldn't fully appreciate the technical difficulty of what Marcus had accomplished. "I've been looking for someone to help me develop training programs for law enforcement and military personnel," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the urgency of someone who'd found exactly what she'd been searching for. "But more than that, I think you could help people understand what real marksmanship looks like when it's built on proper fundamentals rather than expensive equipment and ego." Derek nodded emphatically, his earlier arrogance completely absent. "She's right, Marcus. I've spent thousands of dollars on custom gear trying to achieve what you just did with a rental pistol. There's something about your approach that's fundamentally different from anything I've learned in competition circuits." Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing genuine respect and curiosity rather than the dismissal and mockery that had characterized the morning's earlier interactions. For the first time in 3 years, he was being seen for his full capabilities rather than just his current circumstances. "What kind of training programs?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting genuine interest despite his obvious caution. Sarah's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone whose vision was finally becoming possible. "Practical marksmanship for real-world applications. Teaching people that accuracy comes from understanding principles, not from having the most expensive equipment." showing them what's possible when fundamentals are truly mastered. Emma tugged on Marcus's shirt to get his attention. "Dad, does this mean you could teach other people to be as good as you are?" "Some people, maybe," Marcus replied, kneeling down to her level. "But Emma, the most important thing I do is being your father. Nothing would ever change that." "I know," Emma said with the simple certainty that only children possess. "But wouldn't it be cool if you could help other people learn amazing things too? Like how you help me with my homework, but with shooting?" The innocent logic of his daughter's observation struck Marcus with unexpected force. Emma had always taken pride in his ability to help her learn new things, and she was naturally extending that to the possibility of him helping others. In her mind, there was no conflict between his role as her father and his ability to share his expertise with others. A new voice joined the conversation as a man in a police uniform approached from the back of the crowd. "Excuse me, sir, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Sergeant Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Department. We've been looking for someone to upgrade our marksmanship training program. What you demonstrated today is exactly the kind of real-world shooting skills our officers need to develop." Marcus stood slowly, processing the implications of what was being offered. For 3 years, he defined success entirely through his ability to provide Emma with stability and security. The idea that he might be able to do that while also using his skills to help others had never seriously occurred to him. The position would be part-time, Sarah added quickly, reading his hesitation. "Evenings and weekends mostly. You could keep your current job for as long as you wanted. This would be about sharing expertise, not changing your entire life." Derek stepped forward, his expression earnest and respectful. "Marcus, I owe you more than just an apology for this morning. You've shown me that I've been approaching marksmanship completely wrong. I've been focused on equipment and competition scores instead of understanding the fundamentals that actually matter." The transformation in Derek's attitude was remarkable, but Marcus recognized it as genuine rather than calculated. Sometimes seeing true expertise could humble people in ways that forced them to examine their own assumptions and motivations. "If you're willing to teach," Derek continued, "I'd like to be your first student. I want to learn how to shoot the way you do, not just by better equipment to compensate for poor technique." Emma looked up at her father with shining eyes. "Dad, remember what you always tell me about helping people when we can? Maybe this is one of those times." Marcus felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders, but this time it felt different than the burden he'd been carrying for 3 years. This felt like an opportunity to honor both parts of his identity rather than choosing between them. "I need to think about it," Marcus said finally, though his tone suggested that he was already leaning toward acceptance. "This wasn't what I expected when we decided to try something new together this morning." Sarah smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd recognized potential and successfully nurtured it into possibility. "Take all the time you need. But Marcus, what you've shown us today proves that some gifts are too valuable to keep hidden. The world needs people who understand that true skill comes from dedication to fundamentals, not from shortcuts or expensive substitutes." As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Marcus individually to express their appreciation and ask questions about his technique. Emma stayed close to his side, clearly proud to be associated with someone who had earned such genuine respect through demonstrated competence rather than boastful claims. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same spot where Derek had first mocked his presence at precision point shooting range. But everything had changed. The evening light streaming through the windows illuminated a scene that would have been impossible to imagine during that first Saturday morning visit. Emma sat at a small table near the instructor station, working on homework while keeping one eye on her father's first official training session. She'd insisted on being present for this milestone, declaring that she wanted to witness her dad's new job the same way he'd witnessed every important moment in her young life. Derek Morrison knelt beside a target stand, carefully examining his latest group of shots with the intense concentration of someone genuinely committed to improvement. Gone was the expensive tactical gear and custom equipment, replaced by basic rental firearms and a humble willingness to start over with proper fundamentals. "Remember what we talked about," Marcus said, walking over to examine Derek's target. Equipment can enhance skill, but it can't replace understanding. You're trying to force the pistol to be more accurate than your technique allows. Derek nodded with the earnest attention of a student who'd learned the difference between confidence and competence. You're right. I can feel myself trying to muscle the shots instead of letting proper grip and stance do the work. Sarah Williams watched from behind the counter, her expression reflecting deep satisfaction with how her instincts about Marcus had proven correct. In just 2 weeks, he'd already begun transforming the culture of her range from one focused on equipment and competition to one emphasizing fundamental skills and mutual respect. "Dad, how come Mr. Derek shoots so much better now than he did that first day?" Emma asked during a break in the instruction, her question carrying the innocent directness that adults often found uncomfortably perceptive. Marcus glanced at Derek, who smiled with genuine humor at the observation. "Because now he's focusing on learning instead of trying to prove what he already knows. It's amazing how much better you can get when you admit you have things to learn." The transformation in Derek had been remarkable to witness. His initial humiliation at being outshot by someone he dismissed as an amateur had evolved into genuine respect and a desire to understand what real expertise looked like. He'd become Marcus's most dedicated student and an unexpected advocate for the training program Sarah was developing. "Marcus, I have something to show you," Sarah said, approaching with a folder full of papers. "Registration forms for our new practical marksmanship course. We're already booked solid for the next 3 months." Marcus opened the folder to see applications from law enforcement officers, military personnel preparing for deployment, and civilian shooters who wanted to move beyond recreational plinking to develop real skills. Sergeant Rodriguez had been true to his word, and half his department had signed up for training. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he was asking himself as much as Sarah. "The question is whether you're ready," Sarah replied with a smile. "You found a way to honor both parts of who you are. Emma's getting to see her father use his talents to help others, and you're using skills that took years to develop instead of letting them waste away." Emma looked up from her math homework with the satisfied expression of someone whose worldview had been validated. "I told you it would be good to help people learn things, Dad. Just like how you helped me." Marcus felt a familiar swell of pride in his daughter's wisdom and kindness. She'd never seen his military background as something to hide from or be ashamed of, but simply as another way he could make a positive difference in the world. As the evening's training session concluded, Derek approached Marcus with a target that showed significant improvement from his first attempts 2 weeks earlier. "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to start over. I learned more about real shooting in these 2 weeks than I did in 15 years of competitions." "Everyone deserves a chance to improve," Marcus replied, examining Derek's steadily tightening groups with approval. "The only difference between beginners and experts is that experts are beginners who never stopped learning." As students packed up their equipment and headed home, Marcus realized that he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. A way to be completely himself without compromising his commitment to being the father Emma needed. His new role allowed him to use his expertise to help others while maintaining the stable, present home life that was his highest priority. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, helping Emma pack up her schoolwork. "Dad, can we come back tomorrow to watch you teach the police officers?" Emma asked with the enthusiasm that characterized her approach to all new experiences. "If you want to," Marcus replied, though he already knew she wouldn't miss it for anything. Emma had claimed a front-row seat to his transformation from hidden expert to recognized instructor, and she was clearly proud to be part of the journey. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma slipped her hand into Marcus's and looked up at him with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "Dad, I'm really glad you decided to show everyone how good you are at shooting. It makes me proud that other people get to see what I already knew about you." Marcus squeezed his daughter's hand, feeling grateful for the wisdom of an 80-year-old who'd understood something about courage and authenticity that had taken him 3 years to figure out. Sarah locked up the range behind them, already planning improvements and expansions for the training programs that Marcus had made possible. Sometimes the best opportunities came disguised as simple weekend activities with your children, and sometimes the most profound transformations began with someone having the courage to reveal who they really were. If this story touched your heart and inspired you to see the hidden potential in yourself and others, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're listening from around the world and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary capabilities that often hide behind ordinary appearances. Remember that everyone has gifts worth sharing, and sometimes all it takes is someone believing in you to find the courage to let them shine.